They tore the flag from its pole, stomped on it with mocking laughter, and called him a relic of the past. Roy, the self-proclaimed king of the road, sneered as he spat at the face of Michael West, a 68-year-old veteran who stood silently, his pride unbroken. Confident in their control, the bikers wreaked havoc, certain no one would dare challenge them. What they didn't know was that this quiet man held more power than they could imagine. When the truth came out, their arrogance would lead to consequences they never saw coming. But let's start from the beginning. The summer heat hung heavy over the quiet neighborhood as Michael West, a 68-year-old Vietnam War veteran, enjoyed his morning ritual. His modest home was picture-perfect in its simplicity. A peeling but sturdy porch, a neat flower bed, and an American flag waving proudly in the warm breeze. For Michael, that flag wasn't just fabric. It was a reminder of the friends he had fought beside and the sacrifices they had made. The serenity was broken by the distant growl of engines, getting louder with every passing second. Michael squinted down the street, his instincts sharper than most men his age. Sure enough, a gang of bikers rolled into view, their chrome-covered machines gleaming obnoxiously under the sun. "Well, looks like the circus is in town," Michael muttered to himself, taking another sip of his coffee. The gang came to a stop directly in front of his house. Their leader, a tall, scruffy man with an overconfident smirk, dismounted first. His leather jacket bore a bold patch that read, "King of the Road," as if that made it true. "Hey, old man," the leader bellowed, his voice cutting through the still air like a chainsaw. "What's with the flag? Showing off your patriotism, huh? Don't you think that's a bit outdated?" Michael looked up slowly, his calm gaze meeting the leader's. He didn't say a word, just watched, as if the man before him were an overgrown child throwing a tantrum. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue?" the biker sneered, taking another step closer. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he grabbed the flag from its holder, yanked it down, and tossed it onto the ground. The flag fluttered for a moment before landing at Michael's feet. The leader stomped on it for good measure, looking around for approval from his gang. The other bikers laughed loudly, one of them even pulling out a phone to film the scene. Michael set his coffee cup down gently, bent over, and picked up the flag. He brushed off the dirt with deliberate care, his movements slow and steady. When he finally straightened up, he fixed the leader with a look so piercing it could have silenced a courtroom. "This belongs to me," he said, his voice low but firm. The leader let out a bark of laughter, clearly unbothered. "Belongs to you? You're standing in our neighborhood now, old man. We run the street, got it?" Michael didn't flinch. He didn't blink. His silence, far from passive, seemed to unnerve the biker just a little. "You don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" the leader growled, leaning in closer and spitting on the ground near Michael's boots. Michael remained still, his face a mask of unshakable calm. The laughter of the gang echoed through the street, but behind the curtains of nearby houses, nervous neighbors peeked out, watching the scene unfold. No one dared to intervene. Not yet, anyway. The air seemed to thicken with tension, the quiet defiance of the old man standing in sharp contrast to the gang's loud bravado. As the gang's taunts grew louder, Michael simply stood his ground, his grip tightening ever so slightly on the flag. The leader's smirk wavered for just a second, though he quickly covered it with another jeering laugh. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, "but you're going to regret messing with us." Michael didn't respond, but a faint flicker of something, confidence, maybe even amusement, crossed his eyes. The leader didn't notice, not yet, but the moment of reckoning was drawing closer, and the calm before the storm was almost over. Roy wasn't the type to back down when things were just getting fun, at least by his twisted standards. With a smug grin and a dismissive wave of his hand, he signaled to his crew. It was a clear command, time to ramp things up. The first to act was a wiry, overly eager biker who went straight for the largest window of Michael's house. Armed with a rock he picked up from the driveway, he hurled it with exaggerated enthusiasm. The glass shattered into a spray of jagged shards, the sound echoing down the quiet street. The biker threw his hands in the air like he'd just won a prize. "Bullseye!" he shouted, grinning from ear to ear. Another biker, stocky and loud, turned his attention to the small wooden bench in Michael's garden. It was old and weathered, but clearly well cared for. With a theatrical grunt, he flipped it over, sending it crashing into a flower bed. The flowers, a careful mix of reds and yellows, were now a mess of broken stems and scattered petals. Meanwhile, a third biker, quieter but no less destructive, crouched by Michael's aging pickup truck. With a flick of his wrist, he pulled out a knife and slashed the tires one by one, the air hissing out like a snake's warning. Inside the surrounding houses, neighbors peered nervously through their curtains, too scared to intervene. The bikers, emboldened by the silence, reveled in their chaos. Roy, at the center of it all, soaked in the spectacle like a ringmaster in a cruel circus. "And now," Roy declared, pulling out his phone, "let's make this old geezer famous." His tone was mockingly cheerful, the kind that made your skin crawl. He strutted up to Michael, who stood on his porch, calm as a stone in a storm. Without warning, Roy leaned in and spat directly at Michael's face. The act was as vile as it was deliberate. He smirked as the spit dripped down Michael's cheek, waiting for a reaction. Michael didn't flinch. He reached up, wiped his face with a slow, deliberate motion, and locked eyes with Roy. His gaze was steady, unyielding, and carried a weight that no one else seemed to notice. "You've already said enough," Michael stated quietly, his voice as calm as ever. For a moment, Roy hesitated, caught off guard by the lack of fear. Then he laughed, a loud barking laugh that signaled his gang to join in. The bikers doubled over, pointing and jeering like schoolyard bullies who thought they had won. But their laughter was cut short by a sharp, piercing sound. A siren, the kind that turned stomachs and tightened throats. Red and blue lights bathed the street as not one, but several police cars pulled up to the scene. Roy rolled his eyes dramatically. "Oh, come on. Did one of these scared little neighbors call the cops?" He turned to his crew with a crooked grin. "Relax, boys. They're not going to mess with us." The police cars came to a halt, and the bikers stood their ground, confident that their reputation would keep them safe. The first car's door opened, and out stepped a figure that immediately shifted the atmosphere. This wasn't just another officer. Roy's smirk faltered for the first time as the man approached, his tailored suit and commanding presence speaking volumes. Michael didn't look surprised. In fact, he barely moved, his calm demeanor unshaken as the man walked toward him with purpose. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado starting to waver. Whatever was about to happen, they could feel it wasn't going to go their way. The car door opened with a calm, deliberate motion. Out stepped a man in a sharp, tailored suit, the kind of presence that instantly commanded attention. His expression was cool, almost bored, but his measured steps carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. Flanking him were two uniformed agents, their hands resting lightly on their holstered weapons. The gang of bikers, once loud and cocky, suddenly found themselves shifting uncomfortably. Roy tried to hold his ground, but even his bravado faltered as the suited man approached. The man stopped a few paces away, his eyes locking onto Roy with a piercing intensity. Roy's confident smirk vanished as he recognized the face and the voice. "Roy Miller," the man said, his tone as smooth as ice and just as cold. Or should I say, the self-proclaimed king of the road. "I've been hearing about you." Roy blinked, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to form a coherent thought. Finally, one of his lackeys broke the silence with a stammered whisper. That's the district attorney, Michael West." The name hit like a hammer. Roy's face drained of color, and his bravado crumbled like a sandcastle under a wave. Prosecutor?" Roy stammered, the swagger in his voice now replaced with shaky disbelief. Michael West, no longer the quiet, unassuming man standing on his porch, fixed the gang with a look so steady it felt like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. "You didn't know who I was," Michael said, his voice calm yet razor sharp. "But ignorance doesn't excuse your actions. You've committed enough crimes today alone to fill a small novel." Roy tried to muster a defense, his hands raised in a weak gesture of innocence. "Look, we didn't mean anything by it. We were just—" "Save it," Michael interrupted, his voice cutting through Roy's excuses like a knife. "The police already have a file on you and your crew. Vandalism, theft, intimidation. Shall I go on? Or should we skip straight to the part where I personally ensure you face every charge in court?" Roy's gang, once boisterous, now looked like deer caught in headlights. A few of them began inching toward their motorcycles as if escape was still an option, but the agents were already ahead of them, stepping forward to block any attempt at retreat. Michael took another step closer to Roy, his calm demeanor unshaken. "You have two choices," he said, his tone steady but unyielding. "You can cooperate and prepare for a long conversation at the station, or you can keep acting like fools, and I'll make sure your next destination is a courtroom." The surrounding neighbors, who had been watching from the safety of their homes, started to emerge. Their fear had shifted into awe and quiet satisfaction as the scene unfolded. A few even began to clap, the sound spreading through the small crowd like a ripple. Roy, realizing the game was up, swallowed hard and raised his hands in surrender. We didn't know you were a prosecutor," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Michael tilted his head, his expression almost amused. "You didn't know," he repeated. "That's true, but you knew you were breaking the law, and that's all that matters." With a nod from Michael, the agents moved in, securing the gang one by one. The bikers offered no resistance now, their earlier bravado completely deflated. The once loud Roy looked like a deflated balloon, standing awkwardly as the agents secured his hands behind his back. Michael turned back toward his porch. As he passed the toppled flagpole, he bent down and carefully picked up the American flag. Dusting it off with the same care he had shown earlier, he placed it back on the pole and straightened it with precision. As he finished, he glanced back at the crowd, which had grown larger and was now buzzing with murmurs of admiration. Michael's calm voice cut through the noise as he addressed the bikers one last time. "Never underestimate someone who's fought for something bigger than themselves," he said, "and never think that justice won't catch up with you. It always does." The applause from the neighbors grew louder as Michael turned back to his porch, the flag now flying proudly once more. He picked up his coffee cup, which was still sitting on the small table, and took a sip as if nothing had happened. One of the neighbors pulled out their phone, capturing the moment as the police cars, filled with the subdued bikers, drove away. Within hours, the video would be all over the internet, with millions watching the so-called King of the Road being brought down by a man who knew the true meaning of strength. The flag on Michael's porch waved brightly in the afternoon sun, a silent testament to the enduring power of justice.